Hello, my brothers and sisters in Christ. My name is Father Eric Michael, and I am here today to recite to you some scriptures from the good book. From the good book. The good book. Another chapter from the good book. The stars above. Another most wondrous, most magical, a bit harrowing, a bit gross, a bit gruesome kind of chapter. I'm quite excited for it. I'm quite excited for it. As you can see, I'm quite excited for it. But before we get into the good book, I feel it's necessary to provide a little backstory as to why I'm here to recite such scripture. You see, not long ago, I was asked to officiate a wedding. And I was just so delighted to be asked such a prestigious thing, to accomplish such prestigious things, officiate a wedding. I had not considered myself a holy man of the cloth. I had not considered myself a holy man of the cloth. But this is a great big wide world out here. And any potential avenues I'd very much like to explore. I'd very much like to explore them. I do consider myself a spiritual man. Perhaps not a holy man of the cloth, but a spiritual man nonetheless. And what wondrous potentialities might there be from becoming a man of the cloth? So, needless to say, I took it very seriously. I took this proposal so seriously, in fact, that I moved to Rome. I joined the Holy Brotherhood clergy, and I even lived in the Vatican. I lived in the Vatican. That is not an easy thing to accomplish. They don't just rent out rooms off Craigslist for the Vatican. No, you have to have moved to Rome and joined the clergy in order to be invited into the Vatican. Hours I was there, training, absorbing, learning. Hours. Until the Pope saw me. And I do not know exactly what he said, but I believe he pointed his old wrinkly finger at me and he said, "Blasphemer! Blasphemer!" I am almost positive that that is what he said. And to be quite honest, I still do not technically know the definition of blasphemer. However, I can say this, I do not think it was good. I do not think it was anything good. And I asked him, Mr. Pope, why don't you like me? I've come here to join the cloth. Give me a chance. I'm a man of spiritual vitality. And he said, my brother in Christ, I believe that you are better suited for perhaps the stake. And at this point, I knew that he was not being very nice, because I knew what he was implying. He basically said that I should burn at the stake. I do not know what blasphemer meant, but I do know that during the Salem witch trials, they burned people at the stake, and I did not appreciate that. I said, Mr. Pope, I think you got me all wrong. I think you got me all wrong, buddy. And I do not think that the good Lord would appreciate you judging a book by its cover. I believe that's one of the commandments. Thou shalt not judge a book by its cover. I'm not 100% on that, but I believe it is one of the commandments. I'm pretty sure that when whoever went up on the mountain and carved the stuff into the stone, perhaps Moses on the mountain with the burning bush, I think that was one of the things he carved with the thou shalt not judge a book by its cover, bitch. And I said, Mr. Pope, you got me all wrong. But he did not care. You see, the Pope is basically the general manager of the Vatican. He is the CEO of the Vatican. And there was no swindling my way past the CEO. The CEO did not want me there. He said, get out. And I said, okay, but I already paid for the garb. I already paid for the garb, so I'm keeping it. I'm keeping it, and I will use it for the good of mankind. I will read from the good book with my holy garb. And he said, I don't know what book you think you're reading from, but I assure you it is not the good book. And I said, thou shalt not judge a book by its cover. It is the good book. Doesn't matter. The point is, I suppose I was not cut out for being a man of the cloth. But that does not mean that I was not able to go online and print out a certificate that allowed me to officiate a wedding. Did I waste thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars going to Rome and moving into the Vatican? Yes. None of those fees came with the certificate, the license marriage certificate officiate thing. I had to pay an extra like $200 for that. And on top of that, the garb of the cloth, it set me back. It set me back. But I shan't be set back. I officiated that wedding. I officiated that wedding, and by God as my witness, with God as my witness, that most beautiful fucking couple, they kissed. They kissed in holy matrimony. They kissed in holy matrimony till death do them part. Till death do them part. So anyway, that's a little backstory. That's my little backstory. This chapter is not easy. There's no way to get around that. And so I felt that the best way to approach this chapter was to stay blessed. And there's no other clothings that I have that allow me to feel so blessed. It's important that we all stay blessed for this chapter. I will not say what happens. As I've said before, I'm not a man of trigger warnings, nor am I a man of the cloth, apparently. But I'm even more so not a man of trigger warnings. Because here's the deal. If I were to say XYZ happens in this chapter, and somebody out there who has followed along up until this chapter hears me say XYZ, and they say, oh my God, I'm so sensitive to XYZ. I'm so sensitive to XYZ, I think that I will skip this chapter. What you did was just skip a fear. You just skipped a fear. You were afraid of words. We already conquered our fear of words. The fear of words was a sponsor a week and a half ago. We already conquered that. This, you cannot skip. You skip a chapter, the story is in shambles. Your fears are in shambles. Everything is chaos. You cannot skip just because you don't like XYZ. So I will not be saying what XYZ is. But that is exactly why we are blessing up. So that we can safely navigate the valley of shadow and death. How does that go? Though I walk in the valley of shadow and death, I shall fear no evil. That is why we are blessing up before we read from the good book. And that brings me to today's sponsor. Today's sponsor is the blood of Christ. The blood of Christ. That is how we will even further bless up. Perhaps build some courage to traverse the valley of shadow and death. So anyone whom is able, if you would please join me, I will be drinking from my chalice. Join me. Join me in a little chalice of the blood of Christ, so that we may fear no evil. There is many different bloods of Christ, but as long as it is red, it's good. Do not drink white blood of Christ, full of sugar, gives you terrible headaches, you will have a hangover. That is not the blood of Christ, that is the blood of Beelzebub. That's the blood of Beelzebub or Baphomet. That is headache blood. You do not want the blood of Beelzebub. You want the blood of Christ. Let's all take a moment and pray. Pray for our traversing onward, for our venture through the valley of shadow and death. We pour that out. We pour that out for the big man in the sky. We pour out some of his son's blood for the big man in the sky. Blessings be as we traverse through the valley of shadow and death, I shall fear no evil. Let's just get into the chapter, shall we? Oh, by the way, if you have experienced X, Y, and Z, perhaps you drink two bottles of Christ's blood. Just not Beelzebub. No Beelzebub's blood. That will give you a hangover, especially if you drink two. That will not be a good time tomorrow. So perhaps if you have suffered through X, Y, and Z, you drink 2 bottles of Christ's blood. That is my advice. And now we are to begin. What a beautiful sunset. Chapter 9. Guardian. Life after Maryland didn't get easier once returning to the States. As if a natural disaster would unite our family in some way, having lent sympathy towards the fragility of our being. No, expectations were fruitless and naive. The storm hadn't subsided at all. It only grown stronger. Upon arrival, my parents would divorce. The man who raised me is a very powerful person whose unlimited resources were used to gain full custody, my mother having received monitored visitations once a week. Leaving the attorney's office for the first time being separated from her was a nightmare. "Don't worry," she said, holding us tight. "I'm gonna fix this. I'll make it right. I love you both so much." Her cries grew loud as that man picked Evan and I up to throw us into the back seat of his car. She tried reaching for me through the window, screaming, "Please don't take away my boys. They're all I have." That man wrapped his arm around her neck. "Is this what you want, Beth? I'll fucking bury you," he yelled, strangling her while speeding off. He'd release her to roll away mere inches from being trampled by the back tires. Again, I'd watch him nearly kill my mother right before my eyes. She remained in the road, beaten and battered, her children and soul tied to this world, severed further still. The poison of that man's word never took hold after that incident, having gained the insight needed to see through him, beyond the veil of deception and far into what I'd come to know as the truly wicked. The seldom visitations were difficult for my mother as her heart broke with each goodbye. They were monitored by a person of that man's approval, someone he had influence over. This very negatively affected her mental health as paranoia grew, in turn influencing my own. "You must lower your voice, Icarus," she'd say. "Always watch your words. He'll hear it. He'll see it. It isn't safe here. Not now. Not yet." We were never safe, nor too far from his reach. As if consumed by some supernatural fear, his looming shadow and overbearing presence never faded. It became too much, and she'd turn back to drugs to cope with it all. My mother had a ferocious amount of fight to keep strong for her children, like a wolf backed into a corner. However, the substance abuse and negative influence of those around her led to desperation. There was no way to combat that man's money, attorneys, and reputation as a doctor. She began writing fraudulent checks to keep up with the prolonged court battles, having printed fake IDs to cash them, but her luck ran dry, and she'd receive a federal prison sentence. Holy moly, look at that sky. Oh, beautiful. There were no visitations for her to look forward to, and every letter she wrote was torn to pieces in that man's hands. The only contact I'd ever receive was in the quick answer of a phone. "This is a collect call from an inmate at the California State Federal Penitentiary. Press 1 to accept." But that phone, along with any hope, was ripped away before ever hearing her voice. While my mother struggled within a cell block, I was receiving her strength and waging my own battle within, one of purpose and reason, having known that just as she, I must fight, for my next trial had begun. A fleeting moment faced and overcome, because I'm stronger than my past, stronger than those who've hurt me, and stronger than the force of fear which lies within the constructs of mind. Whether victim or victor is entirely one's choice. What may possess the power to tear us down, even if ourselves we carry forces greater to rebuild? It'd been a couple years since leaving the island, and I was 8 now. We lived in a suburban city of California, in a house indistinguishable from the rest. It wasn't the home of a family, not mine at least. Pictures hung from walls of that man's past and favored children, bare of mine or Evan's existence. We were no more than musters of regret occupying space in a loveless box. There were kids to play with when allowed outside like convicts given yard time. Most were older and twisted in the head, the cat-kicking, pyromaniac, deranged youth of privileged neighborhoods. Who can you blame except those doped up on pharmaceuticals, alcoholic, neglectful, shit-brained excuses for parents? The man who raised me wasn't a drunk or druggie, but the intelligent version of evil incarnate, masquerading as a doctor with his handy-dandy prescription pad to keep those in question entirely loaded on sedatives. There was one kid who lived right across the way, whose bedroom window faced mine. A teenager much bigger than me, and all sorts of fucked 3 times sideways, mentally disfigured. It was just past sundown, and we were down the block where that teen's dad parked his work van. He wanted Evan and I to get inside. "Come on, guys," he said. "It'll be fun. It's like a big tank and we're at war." I may have been a child aged with intellect, having seen too much for my own good, but I was still just a child, and any sliver of innocence remaining, I'd come to believe was stripped of me the second I led my brother into that van. There were a few steam-cleaning vacuums in a sleeping bag laid out beneath us. It reeked of mildew and the sheet metal floor was lined with rust, chipping away under my feet. Dark. The only light was a soft yellow glow barely visible from the street lamp outside the tinted windows. My mind began to wander in attempts to flee, surely a defense mechanism kicking in. He locked the doors, and hearing that click was when the real terror settled. My knees gave way, having buckled to the flattening presence of fear. "Hop into the passenger seat, Icarus," he said as he got into the driver's. I fought looking at him, staring at the window to watch condensation build against cold glass like fog in my mind. It spread quick against the pane. I felt that once there were no clear spots remaining and no ray of light left to shine, that no hope would remain. Darkness would consume, and the monster would feed. He didn't speak for some time as an eerie silence became heavier with each second. Perhaps he had doubts towards the actions to come while contemplating his inevitable decisions, although I shouldn't give him such credit. There was a rhythmic click in his throat as he muttered under his breath like nails on a diabolical chalkboard, words of which I'll never mistake. "Take a look, Icarus. Notice anything unusual?" Can I make a run for it? Would I have time to open this door and get my brother to safety? Will he try and stop me? Will he hurt me? The sad truth is, none of those questions were asked of myself, and the decision to flee hadn't even crossed my mind. It felt like sleep paralysis, a nightmare in waking life. I couldn't move a muscle, crippled by panic, unable to breathe and helpless to scream. As for my mind, hauntingly silent, grasping for straws as brief moments of rational thought became unending voids sink to his heavy panting. I turned slow and hesitant, no longer in control of my body, as if pulled into the tight bondage of his presence. He wore a devious smile strung ear to ear as he glanced down, taking my eyes with him. There was his monstrously erect prick protruding from his pants. A simple glance towards that thing was like peering into the eyes of Medusa. I became petrified, frozen in time to a stone-cold reality. That sick fuck was getting off just on the mere thought of it all. He was some sort of mutated freak, likely due to huffing chemicals in his dad's van. No doubt, his pecker underwent some nuclear waste type of transformative growth. It looked like a veiny version of the teeth tongue that shoots from the xenomorph's jaw in the movie Aliens. He was a lanky, zit-infested cretin. A dirty blonde bowl cut rest over pitch-black eyes, lousy with lust. He practically had textbook school shooter written across his 32-inch plasma screen forehead. I could go on describing this batshit lunatic, but what's the point? I'm not trying to paint a villain here. My finger-made pistols being aimed at an environmental product. To portray him as human would not be justifiable. So why delve? God damn! Just keeps getting better and better over there. Go on, Icarus. Touch it. He spoke sensually. I know you want to. I shook my head no, unable to muster a word. He'd ask a second. Come on, won't you play along? And third time. Just wrap your hand around it. I won't bite. Dread crept up my spine like spiders on skin you can't reach, each leg a touch of terror. His twitching grin stretched up his face and curled like a ghoul, exposing grime-lathered teeth. After refusing his wishes, he laid a hand over my thigh and smiled, turning towards the back of the van to call out my brother's name. Evan. He said it like an animal in heat, seductive, grotesque, feral, particular. As if spoken many times before, having yearned for it in others no different than now. His erotic gaze drawn to a piece of meat like a jackal salivating at the mouth, primed to tear into the soft fibers of his being as a rampage of self-indulgent cravings took control. My heart began racing at speeds never felt, having had no clue what that barbarian was capable of. There's no telling lengths of measure within psychopathic behavior. Evan lifted his head in question, without the faintest idea of what was taking place. I remember it distinctly, for as terrifying it was, he looked up, happily, playfully, innocently, as if nothing at all were wrong. That cheerful expression was the last I'd ever see on the face of my then 5-year-old brother. In that infinite period, it wasn't panic of what might happen to me which washed over, but what that kid may do to him. Call it an innate decision, instinct, impulse, inherent aptitude, second nature, or perhaps an unbeknownst love which gave me the courage. I got up and stepped before my brother, blocking him from the menacing reach of those elongated limbs and exposed claws. That emaciated beast stood, lurched to the sleeping bag, and motioned me inside. "Take off your clothes," he whispered through a gentle moan, keeping his voice down as excitement coursed his veins. I shivered violently, taking off each bit of clothing slowly before he tore at the rest in untamed impatience, strangling me within my collar. "Come now, Icarus," he said, panting a warm and foul stench over my neck. He shoved me head first to the ground, forcing me into the bag as he undressed himself and followed, taking his time, savoring a moment long desired. His sharp talons took me by the hands, pinning me to the floor beneath his weight. I wanted to scream for mercy and cry for dear life, yet not a single noise was made. I can still sense it today, the agony of his torture. I don't dwell upon it, nor let it affect me, but it isn't easily forgotten, especially those soft remarks. "Icarus, how good does it feel?" The pain which lingered most was shame in knowing Evan sat there next to us, eyes wide, meeting mine as he watched. There I was, his big, strong, courageous brother, being dehumanized before him, mortified by a heinous act. Evan remained a very quiet child after that night, having joined me in solitude against his will. Please take the following with an oil drum of Himalayan rock salt. A moment of deep reflection is needed to express sincere apologies to anyone whom my dashing looks, devilish charm, or irresistible allure have affected. It's never been my fault, see? But hot damn, little Icarus must have been a real stud muffin, for it didn't take that short-fused freak very long at all to blow his wad. A boom, 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 boom. A bang, 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 bang. Is it in bad taste to make such a piss-poor mockery of my misfortune? To each their own. I could say it wasn't even that big and could have taken more, but that'd be a bold-faced lie. I may pack a mean punch, but that thing was a goddamn world-ender with its own gravitational pull. Don't even get me started on how cliché it was to have been raped inside a van to begin with. If someone were to say that they find my humor in such regards inappropriate, I'd politely tell them to kick rocks and get bent. If I don't laugh today about the horrors of yesterday, I'd sooner find myself walking in the shoes of a psychopath than those of the fool. You picking up what I'm putting down, smelling what I'm selling, catching my drift, digging my groove, savvy? On the off chance I've not gotten my point across with ill-mannered sarcasm, it's become vitally necessary to express that I'm in no way downplaying the severity of this incident. But if you're still with me here, you know it isn't because I take these situations lightly. On the contrary, I take myself so serious it's hilarious. I've defeated this villain and no longer feed it the fear its evil desires. The only difference between this monster and what others may view as such is I didn't need a sword and shield, but simple smiles and laughter to bring it to its knees. If only the same could be said for everyone. But for most, suffering through these barbaric acts of savagery leaves incomprehensible confusion and a lingering, lackluster sense of self-worth. Crimes as heinous as these can occur with no motive. So, resolution in understanding them and why they took place comes seldom, leaving their victims aimless and lost. But I must make one thing perfectly clear. As devastating an act this may be, the finger cannot be pointed solely towards the twisted individual, but their conditioning. While I'm not excusing innate evils and sick minds of depravity, parental figures and societal upbringing must be held impartially accountable for such injustice. Once that kid was finished using his thick stick within whatever maniacal fantasy was sought, I stood to get dressed. I can't recall if anything was said after that, being so far into my own head that I blacked out from the point of stepping from that van with my brother to the walk back to our house. That space is occupied by a terrifying recollection of nothingness, and the bright smiles of each jester hiding in its shadows. I'd thus far sought to create so much in my mind to escape the trauma endured, but after that night, I never left those places again. For the remainder of my childhood, I kept to those worlds. For living there, I'd be free, if I truly wished to be. When Evan and I got home, the man who raised me was in an outrage. We were never allowed out past dark, and there was no explanation excusable for such violation of law, least of all rape. "Where the hell were you?" he yelled as spit graced my face. "What do you have to say for yourself? Speak up, Icarus. But what, Icarus? Stop stuttering, Icarus. Use your fucking words, Icarus." That knee-buckling fear was still present, not because of what had just happened, but because of what that man may do to me once finding out. Terrified of his reaction, I tried to explain what happened like a timid dog with its head to the floor and tail between its legs, shaking, for it knows the hit's coming. We were taken into the neighbor's van," I said. "He held me down. He did things to me. I'm sorry. Please don't be mad." How utterly repulsive it is that I was the one who had to apologize in fear for the vile atrocities committed against myself. He glared with a face of absolute disgust. It wasn't the look of a loving father to a son in need of nurturing, to be told he hadn't done anything wrong, that it wasn't his fault. No, not in the slightest. I was garbage taken to the curb. "Get upstairs, now," he yelled. That was it. No police, further questions, or a whisper on the matter. Evan was already in bed as I brushed my teeth in that man's bathroom, not even being allowed to take a shower, having reeked of filth and that kid's plagued load still buried inside me. I saw that man approaching through the mirror, creeping up the hallway in slow motion. We locked eyes in the reflection, and I could feel him eating at my soul. He was directly behind me now, breathing down my neck. An aroma of cheap Jovan Musk cologne cut like mustard gas. He put his fist on my head and began digging his knuckles hard into my skull, raising his arm high while instilling the fear of God with each forceful strike laid back down. "Why would you do that, Icarus?" Bam, 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 he'd strike my skull. "Why would you be so stupid, Icarus?" Bam, 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 harder now still. "Do you think that was fucking smart, Icarus?" Digging knuckles deep as might allowed. "Answer me, Icarus! 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 Icarus!" My ears rang from the blunt force trauma and violent echoes of an overbearing brute. From then on, whenever that man spoke my name, the name my mother gave me, it was poison to my ears, and the sole reason I hated hearing it for nearly 2 decades following. My therapy for being a victim of rape, and consolation prize as that kid's #1 bitch, was a relentless beating from my father a half an hour later. I laid in bed that night asking so many questions gone unanswered, all of which revolved around why. Had he been listening? He of all seen and unseen? I hadn't cared to wonder. Only 8 years in, yet believed far past the point of salvation. While I may not lend faith to a religious God, it was difficult to not believe in his existence. After all, was he not the one who placed me in the hands of the deceiver and creator of agony? God never did me any favors, so I dare not call upon such a name, not while under the devil's roof. Some say hell isn't a place to fear ending up at the cost of our sins, but a realm we create and willingly choose to endure through life. I believe that statement holds truth. After all, I'm of its guilt, but I was only enslaved to that prison by that man's sentencing. While those chains of perdition may have once held me, they were never strong enough to keep me bound. It wasn't an answer to prayers I'd hear that night, but the carried whispers of my mother's soul, those very same now heard in Thea. Ever since I was a child, my mother would tell me, "Icarus McHale, you were born a guardian." And as always, she spoke from the depths of my being to remind me of just that. I swore to do anything in my power to protect those I loved, and stand for those who couldn't themselves, to bear their pain, for pain was all I'd come to know. I'd recite that oath every night before falling asleep, sitting up, staring through the window across the street to his, and the sad reminder on display. I'd watch that kid play video games with smiles and laughter, free of guilt. Every night spent reflecting upon that abomination, I was taken back into the van, sleeping bag, and pain he forced upon me. While hard at first, each time I grew stronger, having come to much deeper understandings of why I'd been there in the first place, and that sacrifice made. Love is sacrifice. Love was choosing to step before my little brother. Love, even if misunderstood, paved the way for acceptance and, in time, forgiveness. I'd often hear Evan whimpering on the bunk below me, crying himself to sleep. I sensed his suffering, knew his pain, and could feel his spirit being consumed by sorrow. Forces of misery that, while empathized through another, had pushed me towards finding purpose. To both yearn and fight for a meaning of love I hadn't known, nor shown, but that didn't mean it wasn't there, an ever-growing sense of something so much more. Evan and I weren't allowed outside after that night, having come home from school each day to a room turned prison. No different than Mikhail had in Thea's dream state. I'd perch with my bird's eye, watching, listening, learning, my window acting as a portal of observation to a world of ignorance below. For years the children played as parents conversed, everyone going about their business as if we were never there at all, entirely forgotten. All the while, that kid stood amongst them blissfully. They were blind to what he'd done, and blind to what he was still capable of doing. I didn't peer down on their playful lives with envy, but in despair of those that may be taken. Monsters walk among us every day. They smile as we pass them in the streets, greet us as they scan our groceries, and snicker as they become our friends. They watch us so very, very closely, as they work to spin their webs of deceit. Many years later, I'd see that kid working the kiosk at an outdoor mall, having given a lot of thought as to what I'd do if ever given such an opportunity. Whether confront him, beat the ever-living snot out of him, or expose him as the monster he was. I'd always wondered if he'd continued being that tenacious parasite who left his victims scarred and damned, hopeless to rise from the shallow waters of which they drown each and every miserable day to his disease. However, as I stood there watching him, none of those things came to mind. A part of me truly felt sorry for that sick individual, for I could see that he was no more than a genetic virus predisposed for infection, a rapid onsetting plague to his loved ones, those encountered, but above all else, to himself. The defective consequence of a disillusioned society's mass production, all because of the humanness, or lack thereof, that these lousy, rabid parents can't seem to grasp when it's got them by the throat, screaming in their wretched fucking faces. In some ill and unsound way, that kid was no different from me. I simply channeled my issues in healthier ways and, thankfully, never became a psychopath. Sadly, for many of us unfortunate victims to circumstance, we're born unto scum, manipulated to think like scum, controlled to feel like scum, and finally, become scum, all while trying to function in a society set up to see us swallowed by it. How can we not expect these kinds of people to roam the streets hungry for prey, when these are the monsters our cultures are breeding? Still, there's hope for them, for all of us. Those who are good at understanding the ways of the world and people grew that way for they had no other choice. It was the only way to survive. And so long as we fight to oppose our conditioning, we fight for those unable to recognize it. We fight for the future of those who depend on us, demonstrating better ways to cope, but more importantly, overcome, to accept, surrender, and let that fear pass, illuminating the path of love and forgiveness. Then again, what the hell do I know? I'm just a boy with harlequins for brain cells, who holds on to old shoelaces that contain the essence of windy roads traveled. I'm no more than an emotional support clown who stops to smell each and every rose while engaging in witty banter with bums up and down Reno's Virginia Avenue. And while I'd hate to be the bearer of bad news, Virginia Avenue doesn't have any fucking rose bushes. So, does anything I say lend credibility when speaking on behalf of societal issues and psychological conditioning? Nope. But do I give a hoot? Absolutely not. I am simply, humbly, and thankfully, certainly uncertain. It took me a very long time to understand what that kid wanted more than anything was to feel a sense of power and dominance, to strip me of the innocence which had been stripped of himself. But the innocence we hold and the playful child residing in all of us can never be taken away. It can certainly be abused, forgotten, and left forsaken, but it will always remain so long as we choose to feel and care to nurture as such. Nothing and no one other than ourselves can extinguish the flame carried within, and no matter the pain faced, that fire must be stoked. I could still hear those gentle whispers of my mother, having suddenly woken in Thea's arms. "It's been so very long, but I see him now," she spoke gently, not only aloud, but to the depths of my soul. "It's so good to have finally met you here, Icarus Mikhail, my guardian." Holy moly, good God, look at that sky. What a beautiful chapter to read, a fucking beautiful fucking sky. This side that you are not seeing is very dark and looks like it's gonna rain. Who knows? I had to say prior to the chapter beginning that that chapter was a little gross, that that chapter was a little gruesome, that it was a little violent, a little grotesque. But do you want to know something? Do you want to know something? I do not believe any of those things that I just said. I do not think that it was gross. I do not think that it was gruesome. I do not think that it was violent. I do not think that it was grotesque. I think that shit was magical as fuck. And do you want to know why? Because a terrible, 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 terrible thing occurred. Terrible. Wretched. But do you know what Icarus did? He transmuted. He transmuted. He found a way to take something terrible and make it something light. He brought light to something wretched. He made light of something awful and unworldly. That is why that is a magical chapter and not a gross chapter. You do not need to fall to the pits of sorrow. You do not need to fall to the pits of utter and hopeless depression. Nor do you need a sword and shield to defeat a fucking monster. Perhaps all you need is smiles and laughter. And maybe just a little teeny eensy weensy bit of Christ blood. I didn't need that much, just a sip. Just a sip, and then I poured it out. I didn't need it. That is why this is a magical chapter. And I truly hope for those of you who did not click off as soon as you found out that Icarus was getting violently raped in the ass, for those of you who did not click off, hell yeah. I hope that you found a way to see it as magical. Not everyone will. Not everyone will. Some people will say, I cannot believe that he said those terrible things. I cannot believe he made such a joke out of it. Those people, I'm sure if Icarus was here, he would tell those people, suck my fucking cock. I'm sorry, I'm speaking for him. That was impolite of me. I apologize. We are here on this spiritual pilgrimage to take a tragic story and make it beautiful. We are here to make hard things easier. We are here to navigate those difficult, dire straits. And though we walk in the valley of shadow and death, we shall fear no evil. I'm not a man of the cloth. I wasn't accepted. I wasn't accepted at the Vatican. The Pope called me a blasphemer. The Pope said, you belong on the stake. Do you know what? Suck my ballsack, Pope. I don't mean that. I apologize. I take that back. I'm a little rowdy right now. The sun has gotten me a bit rowdy. The beautiful sunset has me a bit rowdy. Pope, I apologize. I did not mean that. But also, you should have given me a chance. Thou shalt not judge a book by its cover. But I understand where you were coming from. Believe me, I get it. I get it. Anyway, perhaps if the Pope had not told me I had to leave, then I would not have been so inspired to still give the best darn hootin' wedding ever. But that's besides the point. It doesn't matter. I just hope that you found the magic in that chapter. I think that that's the only thing that's important. And I hope that if any terrible things have happened in your life, any wretched acts of abomination, whatever they may be, just know that one of the greatest weapons you'll ever have is smiles and laughter. Thank you so much. I can't wait for next time.